Detective Marcus Webb had learned to trust his instincts over his 16 years on the force, and right now, every instinct was screaming that something was wrong with Westridge High School. It started with a suicide. At least, that's what everyone called it. 17-year-old Jessica Chin had been found hanging in her bedroom 3 weeks ago. The note left behind was brief. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." Her parents were devastated. The school held a memorial assembly, and the case was quickly closed. Then, 2 weeks later, another student died. Bryan Foster, 16, overdosed on his mother's prescription pills. Another note: "The pressure is too much. I can't take it." When the third student, 15-year-old Maya Rodriguez, jumped from a parking garage last week with a note reading, "I just want the pain to stop," the school district called it a suicide cluster and brought in grief counselors. But Marcus wasn't buying it. 3 honor students, all from the same advanced placement program, all dead within a month. 3 identical typed notes, not handwritten, typed. 3 kids who, according to friends and family, had shown no signs of suicidal ideation. Something was very wrong. Marcus sat in his office, reviewing the case files. His partner, Detective Sarah Kim, entered with coffee and a concerned expression. "The school board is pushing back," she said. "They don't want us investigating further. Say we're traumatizing grieving families and students by suggesting these weren't suicides." 3 kids don't just spontaneously decide to kill themselves in identical ways within a month, Marcus said. "And look at this. All 3 notes were printed on the same type of paper, same printer. The forensics lab confirmed it." Sarah leaned over his shoulder. "Could be from a school printer."
Exactly.
"Which means someone at that school printed these notes. Someone who had access to these kids." "You think they were murdered?" "I think they were driven to it," Marcus said. "Or worse, I think someone staged them." The next day, Marcus and Sarah visited Westridge High. Principal Robert Hammond greeted them with a politician's smile and a guidance counselor's concerned tone. "We need to speak with the students' teachers," Marcus said, "particularly those in the advanced placement program." Hammond's smile tightened. "I'm not sure that's necessary. Our teachers are devastated by these losses." "It's not optional," Sarah said firmly. "We're investigating 3 deaths. We need access." Hammond reluctantly agreed, leading them to a conference room where he'd assembled 5 teachers from the AP program. Marcus studied each face, nervous, grieving, defensive. One teacher stood out: Victoria Sterling, who taught AP English and served as the academic coordinator for the gifted program. "Miss Sterling," Marcus said, "you taught all 3 students who died. Can you tell us about them?" Victoria's expression was perfectly calibrated, sad but professional. "They were brilliant students. Jessica was especially talented in literature. Bryan excelled in debate. Maya had a gift for creative writing. Their deaths have shattered our community." "Did you notice any signs of distress, depression, anxiety?" "All gifted students experience pressure," Victoria said carefully, "but nothing that suggested they were in crisis. If I had known, I would have intervened immediately." "What about their grades?" Sarah asked. "Any recent changes?" A flicker of something crossed Victoria's face: annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Actually, all 3 had experienced grade drops in recent weeks. It's not uncommon for advanced students to struggle with the workload. "How significant were the drops?" Marcus pressed. "From A's to C's, mostly. For students at their level, aiming for top universities, that can feel catastrophic. The pressure to maintain perfection can be overwhelming." After the interview, Marcus and Sarah spoke with several students. Most were too grief-stricken or scared to say much, but one senior, David Park, lingered after his classmates left. "Detective," he said quietly, "can I talk to you privately?" Sarah leaned forward. "What do you mean?" David swallowed hard. "Ms. Sterling controls everything in the AP program. She decides who gets recommended for scholarships, who gets leadership positions, who gets the good letters of recommendation. If you're on her good side, your future is golden. If you cross her—" "What happens if you cross her?" Marcus asked. "Your grades mysteriously drop. Your assignments get lost. You get accused of plagiarism or cheating, nothing that can be proven, but enough to destroy your transcript. She's ruined students before." Did Jessica, Bryan, and Maya cross her? Jessica wrote an anonymous complaint to the school board about Ms. Sterling's grading practices. Someone leaked that it was her. After that, her grades tanked. Bryan challenged one of Ms. Sterling's lesson plans in class, said her interpretation of a book was wrong, and he could prove it. He went from top of the class to barely passing. "Maya." David's voice dropped to a whisper. "Maya was going to report Miss Sterling for something. I don't know what, but she told me she had evidence of something bad." "Did Maya say what kind of evidence?"
No.
But 2 days later, she was dead. After David left, Marcus and Sarah sat in silence, processing the implications. A teacher systematically destroying students who challenge her? Sarah said, "That's a motive for harassment, maybe for sabotage, but murder?" "Unless they discovered something bigger," Marcus said. David mentioned Maya had evidence of something. What if all 3 students found out about something criminal? "We need to look into Sterling's background." The investigation into Victoria Sterling revealed a disturbing pattern. Over her 15-year career at Westridge, she taught at 3 different schools. At each previous school, there had been student complaints, allegations of favoritism, grade manipulation, and psychological abuse. Nothing was ever proven. She'd moved on before investigations could conclude. But more concerning was what they found in her financials. Victoria Sterling earned a teacher's salary, about $60,000 a year. Yet she owned a home worth $800,000, drove a luxury car, and took expensive international vacations. Victoria Sterling ran a private college consulting business on the side. She charged parents up to $50,000 to guarantee their children's admission to elite universities. Her success rate was extraordinary. Nearly 100% of her clients got into their top choice schools. But it was more than consulting. Marcus discovered evidence of systematic fraud. Sterling had been writing students' application essays, fabricating extracurricular activities, and, most damning, she appeared to be involved in manipulating grades and test scores. "She's running a college admissions scam," Marcus said. "And I'll bet anything that Jessica, Bryan, and Maya found out about it." They obtained a warrant to search Sterling's home and office. In her home office, they found files on dozens of students, including extensive files on the 3 dead students. Jessica's file contained drafts of college essays that Jessica's parents confirmed their daughter hadn't written. There were also emails showing that Sterling had promised Jessica's parents guaranteed admission to Yale for $40,000. Bryan's file revealed that he'd discovered Sterling was using his debate achievements, which he'd earned legitimately, to falsely bolster her consulting credentials. He'd confronted her, threatening to expose her. Maya's file was the most damaging. It contained evidence that Maya had been investigating Sterling for a school journalism project. Maya had discovered that Sterling was receiving kickbacks from certain colleges, payments for steering wealthy students toward schools that would accept them despite substandard qualifications. But the most chilling discovery was a document on Sterling's computer, a detailed psychological profile of each student, including notes on their vulnerabilities, family situations, and mental health. For Jessica, Bryan, and Maya, there were additional notes. Liability must be neutralized. Marcus felt sick reading the files. Sterling had systematically identified each student's breaking point and exploited it. She didn't kill them with her own hands, Sarah said, reading over his shoulder. She destroyed them psychologically until they killed themselves. Or she staged their deaths to look like suicides, Marcus added. Look at this. He pulled up Sterling's search history. In the weeks before each death, she'd researched suicide methods, how to type suicide notes that would be convincing, and how to avoid leaving forensic evidence. They arrested Victoria Sterling at school the next day. She maintained her composure, even as Marcus read her rights, her expression one of mild annoyance rather than fear. At the station, Sterling sat across from Marcus and Sarah with her lawyer, an expensive defense attorney who'd arrived within an hour. My client is happy to cooperate, the lawyer said smoothly. She's done nothing wrong. Marcus laid out the evidence, the fraud, the files, the search history, the financial records. Sterling's expression never changed. I run a legitimate consulting business. If students were struggling with the pressure of academic excellence, that's tragic, but it's not criminal. You systematically targeted and destroyed 3 students who threatened to expose your fraud, Sarah said. I taught students. Some couldn't handle the pressure. That's not my fault. You researched suicide methods before each death, Marcus countered. I was concerned about my students' mental health. I wanted to understand what they might be going through. Her answers were too perfect, too prepared. Sterling had thought through every possible question and crafted responses that, while suspicious, weren't quite enough for a murder charge. But Marcus had one more card to play. We've been talking to your former students, he said, from all 3 schools where you taught. 12 students have come forward with similar stories, students who challenged you and then experienced mysterious grade drops, lost assignments, and accusations of cheating. 5 of those students attempted suicide. For the first time, Sterling's composure cracked slightly. But here's the interesting part, Marcus continued. One of those students kept a detailed diary. Emily Warren, from your time at Brookfield Academy 10 years ago. She documented everything, your threats, your manipulation, your systematic destruction of her academic record. She tried to kill herself, but she survived. And now she's willing to testify. Sterling stared at them, her carefully constructed mask finally slipping. Beneath it was something cold and calculating, the face of someone who viewed students not as people, but as commodities to be managed and eliminated when they became inconvenient. I want to make a deal, Sterling said abruptly. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she waved him off. I'll tell you everything, but I want immunity from murder charges. No deals, Marcus said flatly, but cooperation might help when it comes to sentencing. Sterling was silent for a long moment. Then she began to talk. The story that emerged was chilling. Victoria Sterling had started her consulting business 15 years ago, initially as a legitimate service. But as competition increased and her success rate became her primary selling point, she'd begun cutting corners. Writing essays for students, falsifying achievements, paying for leaked test questions. When students discovered what she was doing and threatened to expose her, she developed a system for silencing them. She would systematically destroy their academic records, isolate them from support systems, and leverage her position as a trusted teacher to manipulate their parents into believing their children were having mental breakdowns. Most of the time, they just broke, Sterling said with disturbing detachment. They'd become so depressed and overwhelmed that they'd withdraw, drop out, or transfer schools. Problem solved. But Jessica, Bryan, and Maya didn't just break, Sarah said. Sterling's expression hardened. They were going to destroy everything I'd built. Jessica was going to the media. Bryan had contacted the state education board. Maya had evidence that could send me to prison. So you killed them, Marcus said. I gave them a way out, Sterling corrected coldly. I knew their vulnerabilities, Jessica's perfectionism, Bryan's family pressure, Maya's anxiety disorder. I simply amplified them, made them believe suicide was their only option.
How?
Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know.
How?
Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Sterling detailed her methodology with clinical precision. She'd used her position of authority to isolate each student, convince their parents that their children were having breakdowns, and systematically removed their support systems. For Jessica, Sterling had convinced her parents that their daughter needed to be pulled from extracurriculars and monitored constantly, effectively isolating her. She'd then sent Jessica anonymous messages detailing how her academic failures would destroy her future. For Bryan, she'd spread rumors about him cheating, destroyed his reputation among peers, and made him believe his family would be ashamed of him if the accusations became public. For Maya, Sterling had accessed her therapy records through the school counselor, a violation of privacy laws, and used Maya's anxiety disorder against her, triggering panic attacks and convincing her that she was losing her mind. And the notes? Marcus asked. I typed them, Sterling admitted. From their own writings, their own words. I knew what they would say, because I knew how I'd broken them. On the nights they died, I convinced each of them that I was there to help, that I understood. I gave them the option of ending their pain. I made it seem like their idea. You were with them when they died. Sarah's voice was shaking with rage. I was nearby, making sure they followed through. Jessica needed encouragement. Bryan needed someone to tell him it was okay to be weak. Maya needed someone to confirm that her pain would never end. The confession was damning, but Sterling's lawyer immediately moved to have it suppressed, arguing coercion and violation of Miranda rights. The legal battle was intense. However, Marcus and Sarah had built a strong case beyond the confession.
They had
Emily Warren's testimony and evidence from 10 years ago. Financial records proving Sterling's fraud. Testimony from 12 former students documenting her pattern of abuse. Evidence that Sterling had accessed confidential student records illegally. The prosecution argued that while Sterling hadn't physically killed the students, she had manipulated vulnerable minors into taking their own lives, a form of manslaughter at minimum, and potentially second-degree murder given the premeditation and malice involved. The trial lasted 3 months. The courtroom was packed every day with parents, students, teachers, and media. The prosecution painted a picture of a predator who'd used her authority and psychological knowledge to destroy anyone who threatened her criminal enterprise. Sterling's defense argued that she was a dedicated teacher whose private business practices were separate from the students' tragic decisions to end their own lives. They claimed the students were already troubled and that Sterling couldn't be held responsible for their choices. But the testimony from Emily Warren changed everything. Emily took the stand, now 27 years old, and described in excruciating detail how Sterling had systematically destroyed her life 10 years ago. She presented emails, recordings, and her detailed diary entries. She explained how Sterling had manipulated her parents, isolated her from friends, and convinced her that suicide was her only option. I survived, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. But Jessica, Bryan, and Maya didn't. And that's because Ms. Sterling got better at it. She learned from students like me. She perfected her technique. She became more efficient at driving vulnerable kids to their deaths. The defense tried to discredit Emily, suggesting she was unstable and biased. But when the prosecution called 11 other former students who told nearly identical stories, students from 3 different schools spanning 15 years, the pattern was undeniable. The most powerful testimony came from Bryan's mother, who described how Sterling had convinced her that her son was having a breakdown and needed to be isolated from his friends. How Sterling had suggested that Bryan might be dangerous to himself or others. How Sterling had recommended a therapist, who turned out to be a colleague of Sterling's who fed information back to her. She was in my home, Mrs. Foster sobbed, sitting at my kitchen table, drinking my coffee, telling me how to help my son. And the whole time, she was the one destroying him. She killed my boy and made me help her do it. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the verdict was read: guilty of 3 counts of second-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty of abuse of a minor, guilty of illegal access to confidential records, guilty of multiple counts of attempted manslaughter for the students who had attempted suicide. The judge's words at sentencing were scathing. Miss Sterling, you were entrusted with the care and education of children. Instead, you treated them as obstacles to be eliminated when they threatened your criminal enterprise. You used your knowledge of psychology not to help, but to destroy. You identified vulnerable young people and systematically drove them to their deaths. The law struggles to categorize what you did because it's so calculated, so cold, and so evil. You didn't pull a trigger or wield a weapon, but you are as much a murderer as anyone who has stood in this courtroom. You weaponized these children's minds against themselves. Victoria Sterling was sentenced to 75 years in prison without possibility of parole. After the trial, Marcus visited the families of Jessica, Bryan, and Maya. They were grateful for the justice, but the grief remained overwhelming. Will this stop it from happening to other kids? Jessica's father asked. Are there more teachers like her out there? Marcus wanted to offer comfort, but he believed in honesty. The system failed your children. Sterling was reported multiple times over the years, but she was always protected by administrators who didn't want scandal, by a system that values reputation over truth, by gaps in oversight that allowed her to move from school to school. What changes now? Mrs. Foster asked. That's up to all of us, Sarah said. This case has exposed how vulnerable students are to abuse from authority figures, how easy it is for predators to hide behind professional credentials. In the months following the trial, significant reforms were implemented, mandatory reporting systems for student complaints that couldn't be ignored by administrators, background checks that included complaints from previous schools, even unproven ones, oversight of teachers' private business relationships with students and families. The college admissions consulting industry faced increased regulation. Several universities that had accepted payments from Sterling's scheme faced investigations. David Park, the student who'd first spoken to Marcus, organized a memorial at Westridge High. Hundreds of students attended, not just to mourn Jessica, Bryan, and Maya, but to speak openly about the pressure they faced and the fear they'd lived with under Sterling's control. We were all scared of her, David said during his speech. We knew that she could destroy our futures with a word, a grade, a recommendation letter. We stayed silent because we thought we had to, that our dreams depended on staying in her good graces. Jessica, Bryan, and Maya tried to speak up, and they died for it. We can't let their silence be permanent. We have to keep speaking. 1 year after Sterling's conviction, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It was from Emily Warren. Detective Webb, it read, I wanted you to know that I've started a foundation in honor of Jessica, Bryan, and Maya. It provides legal and psychological support for students who are being abused or manipulated by teachers or coaches. We've already helped 37 students escape situations like the one I was in. For 10 years, I carried guilt about surviving when I felt like I should have done more to stop Sterling. But this case taught me that speaking up, even years later, can still save lives. If my testimony helped convict her and prevent her from hurting more kids, then maybe my survival had a purpose. Thank you for believing the victims, for seeing the pattern, and for refusing to accept that 3 brilliant kids just decided to give up on life. You gave us justice. More importantly, you gave us validation, proof that what happened to us was real, was wrong, and was criminal. The case of Victoria Sterling became a landmark in education law, cited in policies about teacher misconduct and psychological abuse. It forced conversations about the pressure placed on students, the power imbalances in educational settings, and the need for genuine oversight of those entrusted with children's welfare.